As opposed to now. You now have a refrigerator, you have a microwave, you have two cars, you have a...
Sure, okay, so if you want to talk about the technological advances...
Well, I mean the stuff that you have for your money.
Let's watch this amazing conversation between Anna Kasparian and Ben Shapiro. You know, sometimes when I see videos of people having a very productive conversation, I am so happy because it makes me believe that somehow we still have people who are open-minded enough to have a difficult conversation with each other.
In the future, one of the places where there will actually be bipartisan agreement is, I think indirectly, it will have serious effects on labor, but the sort of willingness now to face up to the threat that China represents is going to have some pretty dramatic impact on reshaping supply chains, on reshaping how manufacturing and labor work, particularly in the United States. I think a lot of the outsourcing that has gone to China is going to be reshored in fairly short order, given the fact that both parties are now realizing what a threat China represents.
Well, look, and aside from China being an adversary and all of that, and I'm a little uneasy with some of the rhetoric that I'm seeing, and it seems like an area where Democrats and Republicans are united.
Well, I just have to say that if there's one entity that has managed to unite the Republicans and the Democrats, that is China. Democrats and Republicans have hardly ever agree on anything. In fact, they are like two sides of a coin. They will never agree on anything, right? But China has managed to bring them together. And they are like, oh, China is a very, very bad dude, right? And we all must be united if we were to win this battle against China. So, thanks to China, Democrats and Republicans are now like, oh, maybe we should work together. And even though we fight each other all the time, and even though I don't like you and I know you don't like me, but maybe for the sake of China, let's come together. So it's so amazing to see how things are unfolding.
The rhetoric, I don't want it to lead toward an actual war with China. And I feel like Biden has been irresponsible with some of the things he said. Like, oh, if China invades Taiwan, we'll have boots on the ground. Don't say stuff like that. That's incredibly stupid. But in terms of the manufacturing issues, the supply chain issues, I'm very happy to see that politicians are finally waking up to the fact that we need to manufacture things in the United States.
Yeah, Biden has been poking their bear. But I must say sometimes a direct confrontation is better, right? It's better to set things the way they are. And sometimes, it's always advisable to use diplomacy and to be a little bit vague, right? Don't say something cut and dry, like they say, right? But coming to Biden saying that he is going to defend the people of Taiwan in case China provoke them or in case China invades them. I think there are two sides to this story. One is it gives Taiwanese or the people of Taiwan an assurance that Biden will come to their aid or America will come to their aid in case China invade. And you must remember, he said, in case China invade. He did not say that if Taiwan attack China, okay? These are two different things. In case China invade. So this can serve as an assurance to Taiwan and also as a deterrent to China, which I think is super important. I also think that if the European Union or America would have made it clear to Russia that if they invade Ukraine, America was going to defend Ukraine, I believe that maybe Putin would have thought twice before actually invading Ukraine. So some strong statements might be necessary sometimes, but not all the time. So let's continue.
I mean, this is one of the failures of, Venezuela's policies. They stopped manufacturing things, started importing everything, And once oil prices went down, and oil, of course, is like their number one commodity and export, they were screwed, right? So we experienced how insanely fragile our supply chains are. We need to manufacture jobs here in the or manufacture products and bring jobs back here to the United States. I like that we're headed in that direction to some extent. The CHIPS Act is a good example of that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I think there's certain specified industries, chips are obviously one of them,
right,
where they actually implicate national security. And so you are going to see some right-left coalitions that are sort of odd when it comes to reshoring, that sort of stuff.
Same with pharmaceutical drugs, by the way.
That's true.
Well, about manufacturing, I have always said it on this show, manufacturing is a very, very important aspect of any economy. And let's take the case of Africa, for example. Africa is where it is right now because of the lack of manufacturing. Africa imports almost every single thing that they consume. Africa exports natural resources, and in return, they import almost every single thing. That has been a very, very big problem for Africa, and it hasn't really helped Africa move ahead. Because you must remember, manufacturing creates jobs for the people. It's a very important part of the growth and development of any society or any country. If there is manufacturing, people have jobs to do. And when you export finished products, it also gives you a certain strength and power within the global community. Now, if you only import, then it weakens your power. Take, for example, China. China is the world's factory. China manufactures almost 9 of every 10 items we consume. And no one can bullshit China. In fact, China has become super, super influential, and people are towing the line when they are dealing with China. If Africa is to grow, if Africa is to thrive and succeed, then Africa must start thinking on how to manufacture stuffs in Africa. And that is what the Ghanaian president, Nana Akufo-Addo, has said many times. And he is actually trying to implement this. He is trying to make sure that certain items be manufactured in Ghana. I think it's a great move that other African leaders need to look into. We must start manufacturing stuff in Africa. Africa has a population of more than 1 billion people. Not just people, but vibrant people. In fact, the youngest population all over the world is in Africa. Africa has talented young men and women. Africa has the labor force. Africa has the resources, the raw minerals. Africa has the climate good for manufacturing. So Africa should start manufacturing things. It's very, very important. But let's continue.
Any stuff that has been manufactured in China heretofore and that seriously impacts national security is going to be reshored. Much of it's not going to be reshored in the United States, by the way. A lot of it's going to end up in Vietnam. Some of it's going to end up in Thailand. Mexico. You're going to see a lot of this stuff go to other places on the globe. And the sort of countervailing point to the we need to reshore everything is that autarky has essentially been a giant failed economic strategy wherever it's been tried. The idea of all manufacturing happens in our country. All products must be produced from within. That generates economic failure. I mean, one of the reasons that Venezuela has failed is specifically because it is essentially economically isolated and self-isolated. I mean, they nationalized virtually all of their industry, and they prevented people from being able to own even within their country. I mean, there's foreign direct investment basically dried up. There was no money going into Venezuela. I mean, one of the there's half of the story that's been told when it comes to the American economy about stagnating wages. The other half that has not been told is that what you get for your wages now is way better than what you got in 1980. I mean, that is just a reality. You would not wish to live in 1980 as opposed to now. You now have a refrigerator, you have a microwave, you have 2 cars, you have a...
Sure, okay, so if you want to talk about the technological advances...
Well, I mean, the stuff that you have for your money.
I get what Ben is trying to say about what you can actually get from the amount of money you have. And yeah, I get that. And why America decided that outsourcing manufacturing was the best way forward. You have to understand that people want cheap items. People want to be able to get things as cheaply as possible. And the companies also, the industrial complex, wants to make as much profit as possible. And that was why they decided to outsource not all, but most of the productions to China and India. And even though they, like they mentioned, even though they are talking about bringing back manufacturing, most of it would not still come back to America. They will go to like Vietnam, even Thailand, India, where they can manufacture goods as cheaply as possible. And it's because Americans are like, we don't want to know where these items are being made. As long as it's cheap, we are good to go. That we don't care whatever means was used to manufacture this item, as long as it's cheap. Americans are like that, no. And the industrial complex realized this at an early stage, and they outsource almost every single thing. But then again, I have to say that even though America do not manufacture goods as they used to do, or as much as they used to do, but they have a very vibrant consumer base, right, and service base. That's why they are able to still keep their standard of living and their worth without necessarily manufacturing anything. But if we take the case of Africa, Africa is relatively very poor, and manufacturing in Africa would be like a very, very great thing for Africans, because then they will be able to have jobs to do, which will therefore elevate the living standard of the people and their families, you see. So I believe that manufacturing at home is always a great thing. But let's hear what Anna has to say.
Aside from 2 specifically government-subsidized areas, healthcare and education.
There's a lot of crap. Okay, so look, honestly...
Would you rather live in 1980? Like that standard of living?
In terms of the quality of products that Americans could buy, I want to go back to the 1950s. Okay, I'm literally...
Cuba's right there. They're still driving those cars.
I completely stopped buying new clothes. Everything I buy now is vintage, made by American garment workers in the 1950s. And those garments, by the way, look like they're brand new. Brand new. Quality. Like what we did...
But the percentage of salary that you would have to spend on that is much higher.
That's true. So
for the worker, you're not shopping vintage shops from the 50s. You're going to H&M.
But understand. So what happened with, especially, this was what happened in the 1970s. We started offshoring jobs and really focused on consumerism, right? So wages started to become stagnant. But Americans were okay because they can rely on cheap products that are made in other countries through exploited labor, right? So we have a bunch of cheap crap we can buy, sure. But the quality of the stuff we're buying is not there. We have to replace it after. I mean, look at clothing in particular. You buy clothes in America that, by the way, were made in some other country, in some factory or whatever. You wash it, falls apart the next day.
I mean, that's true, but the percentage of your salary every year that you're spending on clothing is way lower than it was in 1980. And when you talk about sort of the economic narrative of the 70s, there's a countervailing point of view, which is that heavy unionization, high labor costs in the 50s and 60s, and a time where literally the rest of the world was physically destroyed by World War II.
And we also have to mention that it was made with cheap labor, or maybe slave labor, allegedly. But should be told, what Anna is saying is really correct. I think that this kind of argument always goes both ways, right? The first is, the industrial complex wanted to make so much profit, right? So they outsourced the jobs abroad. But then you have to also understand that the people wanted cheap items. Take, for example, with the standard of living all around the world, right? If items are not made cheap, many people cannot afford it. Take for like those very high brands like the Gucci, the Armani, the Prada, right? Those are very good quality products, right? But not everyone can afford them, given our situations. Not all of us can afford it. And that was why companies realized that if we do not get things as cheaply as possible, people will not afford. People might not be able to buy. And for the economy to really run smoothly, most people, they call it the middle class, have to be able to afford things. If the middle class cannot afford things, then the economy would not run smoothly. And I believe that America or American companies realized this, that outsourcing was the best possible way that we can keep everyone happy. We can make so much money while keeping everyone happy. People can be able to get as many stuffs as they want for as cheaply as possible. But let's continue.
Gave us a head start, which we then blew over the course of the next few decades, to the point by the 1970s, we have a decade of economic stagnation with literally no stock growth from essentially 1963 all the way up till the early to mid 1980s. You have 20 years where your stocks don't actually appreciate in any serious way because the economy basically stops dead. We're getting outcompeted. The American car companies, which are the crown jewel of American industry, are getting outcompeted by Toyota and Hyundai. And by the 1970s, 1980s, we're importing all of those cars. That's not because we offshored to them. It's because we didn't offshore them. It's because
we totally did offshore. Maybe not to Asian countries. We offshored a lot. I mean, think about the Rust Belt, right? And all the manufacturing jobs that went to Mexico.
The offshoring happened later. That offshoring happened in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Correct.
That was an aspect of attempting to compete with the import of cars from other countries. I mean, Toyota becomes a world power in terms of being an actual global corporation because our manufacturing costs in the United States are too high. We were living fat and happy off the excesses of the rest of the world being destroyed, essentially. And because of that, we could afford to do all this. We were the only game in town. And then we weren't the only game in town. Suddenly, Japan rises from the ashes and is an economic world power and is outproducing us when it comes to cars.
Well, I think that the reason why American cars were not able to compete with maybe cars from Japan wasn't because the cost was really high, though it was high. But I think that it was because they didn't figure out a way to make it cheaper, even within America. And that was the reason. And also, they let imported cars in. Let's say, for example, that America put in place a tax for cars that were imported from Japan, just so it can balance up with the cars that were made in America. People in America would still go for American cars, but they let in the imported cars to be so cheap in America, and that was why the American-made cars couldn't compete. There has to be a balance in this. If not, then one is going to overshadow the other. Cars that were imported from Japan was so relatively cheap than cars that were manufactured in America. So if they wanted to compete, they would have put a very high tax on those cars that were imported from abroad, or they would have just stopped it altogether. I know that approach doesn't sound nice. It's kind of like not a good practice, but to protect homemade products, certain rules must be put in place. Like in Africa right now, I think in Ghana, the president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, totally outright banned the importation of certain items just so the local made items can thrive, can survive, and people can start consuming locally made items. Such principles could have been put in place in America to kind of like promote locally made items. But if they were not put in place because of politics or because of greed or whatever, then they have themselves to be blamed for that. But to you guys out there, what do you think about this very interesting conversation between Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian? Let us know in the comment section below, because like always, we love hearing what you have to say. And please do not forget to like this video, share this video, follow our Facebook page, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel, because this really helps us a lot and we shall forever be grateful. Okay, so thank you very much for doing just that. And like always, see you in the next one.